Welcome to this episode of the Customer-Centric Retailing Podcast, a forum for retail leaders to discuss industry trends, challenges, and opportunities.
This is Anil.
And this is Fabi, and each episode we invite some of the brightest minds in the industry to discuss the future of customer centricity, with topics ranging from the rise of e-commerce to brick-and-mortar operations, to omni-channel technology to retail culture, and how all of these elements come together to create customer-centric retailing. Today we have with us Liza Amlani, founder of the retail strategy group, Allyship Advocate, and former buying lead for Ralph Lauren. Welcome to the podcast, Liza. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Great. We're doing well as well, and we're really excited to have you on the podcast today to pick your brain on a number of different topics. Before we start, as is tradition on this podcast, could you briefly walk our audience through your background a little bit and what really brought you here today?
Sure. Well, my background, I have been in the fashion retail industry for over 20 years. I spent most of my time in merchandising and buying with Ralph Lauren, Club Monaco, a few department stores. So I've kind of seen both sides of wholesale and retail, predominantly in apparel and accessories. I've done some product development in those roles as well. And then I moved into consulting about, let's say, 3 years ago. I was with Accenture with their retail strategy group. Most of my work was with Nike, Walmart, the bigger brands for sure. And in November of 2020, I actually launched my own practice. So I not only work with brands, but I also work with retail technology companies, sometimes other types of companies, even schools, as almost like a retail interpreter, I'd say. Giving folks a better idea of what merchants and retailers and brands go through so that they can understand not only their pitch, but I also act like a sounding board.
Awesome. So Lisa, it's great. You've seen almost the tail end of the physical only, brick and mortar only retailing when it was just transitioning and starting to do e-com. And since then, today, when we are talking about all that omni-channel retailing and all that, right? So I believe definitely, retailing has got a lot more complicated. Customer expectations are way high. So what do you see? How has merchants, the buyer's life has changed over the period of time since you've been experiencing it?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question because my focus is really on the last year or so and how the merchants should be changing. The use of data, I think, is really the biggest factor of change. Demand planning, there's a lot more tools out there. And I think a lot more traditional retailers, especially during the pandemic, have enabled this technology. I mean, retailers and brands, we hate change. And, we love to work in silos. So, getting the technology on board, I believe, has made its way to merchants and planners, using insights from data to actually make decisions. Not to say that we weren't doing that before, but I think that there's a lot more data available, and the data that was there, we now know what to do with it. I think that was a really, really big challenge, especially with those traditional legacy retailers that have 11 systems and their tech stack is like this high. So they do have a lot of data. It's just a matter of, do they really know what to do with it? So now I think that merchants and planners are able to utilize that data, develop product with more customer centricity in mind, and buying better product. I think that's where merchants are today.
Yeah, I can totally understand, especially with all the data that we have from social media and also your a lot of brands can do direct to customers. So now they can get firsthand high quality data from their own direct experiences with the customer. With all this data put together, the right kind of analytics can bring in lot of good insights about what my customer wants so that we can deliver them high quality products to match their taste, their needs. And definitely that should increase the customer retention and loyalty, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly. But I find that because retailers and brands are just so used to working in silos, a lot of the insights that were taken from all this wonderful data, it was just not being used to the full extent and by the right people. Or the insights were only being used by certain categories. Like, let's say you have a brand that has tops, bottoms, accessories, footwear, right? So in some cases, insights were only used in, let's say, some parts of footwear or some parts of apparel, but nobody was really talking to each other. And that's a challenge that a lot of retailers have because of how they're set up initially. So it's almost like you want everybody to just stop what they're doing and let's start fresh and, build up in a new way so that you can think in a new way.
Yeah, in fact, right, you said, because a lot of customers today buy like a full, set of items. Like they would buy top, bottom, and shoes and all that, all this thing, the whole look at a time, which means that you have to combine the data of all those categories and come up with the right kind of solution for your customer. And in fact, those kind of insights will help associates, even the store associates when they are selling, because merchant, when they are buying item and then creating the assortment, it's important that they help store associate with the right kind of information, right kind of stories, so that customers, they can talk to customer and do the right kind of storytelling, so that customer knows exactly how this product should be, purchased and consumed.
Yes, yes. In theory, I think absolutely. The challenge is in reality that because cross-functional teams are not really working together, and sadly, this is a challenge across retail. You're also finding in some cases, like some larger companies, I won't name them, but their e-commerce was set up after the fact, which is many retailers that has happened, but because their e-commerce was set up after the fact, they have a separate line of merchants. So even down to the SKU level, they're setting up 2 SKUs for the same product. There's a lot of mismanagement, I think, happening, and it's more about people just we have to start cleaning that up and start thinking differently and implement new ways of working and new ways of thinking using the insights and the data that is available. So I think that merchants are absolutely getting there. I wish we could get there a bit quicker, but I mean, there's, you look at Levi's, for example, they're doing a phenomenal job in using insights in their digital strategy and their DTC strategy. They're really all working together across channel because they know that the customer doesn't see channel, they just see brand, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what you said. People call this, it's exactly what digital transformation is all about, bringing all those information, all these channels together, and present your brand to the customer as a one brand that only cares for the customer. And they are not focused on a channel, but they are focused on the customer, because only then we can actually provide the right kind of products and services.
Yeah, exactly. It is about that seamless journey, but it's also about how the customer is viewed by the brand. And they should be viewed with the same lens, right? So I think that's a big, big part of digital transformation strategies and DTC strategies, is really about seeing the customer with one lens and simplifying the way you do things.
I think what's interesting is that you mentioned that you think a lot of the changes that have occurred in kind of the last 1 to 2 years, and I'm sure the pandemic played a pretty big role in that. But I'm curious, how do you see the role of the merchant really evolving over the next 5 years? And what would you like to see happen?
That's a great question. I want to see merchants use a lot more data. I want the things that they've been using during the pandemic because they couldn't travel to trade shows, they couldn't travel to showrooms or across the world to see and discover product. I want them to continue to use the tools that they have been, which is, the virtual showrooms, using technology, enabling VR, AI, all the great things that technology gives us, I want merchants to continue to use those tools and not just say, okay, we can travel now. We're back to living on plane. Because at the end of the day, that not only the expense, but the impact to the environment of all that travel and setting up these, the coteries of the world, I think that there's definitely a way to maybe bring a hybrid way of working and discovering product instead of, going back to, 70-80% travel as a merchant, because, what you see at Magic, you're also going to see at Coterie, right? Let's be honest. It's discovering the newness that brings delight not only to the merchant but also to the customer, and you can get that with a digital tool. There's a lot of digital marketplaces out there and showrooms that have been built during the pandemic, which I think have been awesome. What I would love to see is the way that retailers build out their merchant and planners, adding data scientists into that mix so that data becomes part of the way you work instead of being, okay, we have digital over here, this is e-com, this is omni, but really those digital insights and capabilities should be infused into all parts of the business so that everybody's working together.
Yeah, in fact, with the introduction of digital, something that really happens is you can experiment much faster. You don't know, because like you said, we can use all these virtualization technologies to get the feedback from our customers much more quickly. And if we need to change a little bit, we can change. We can iterate much faster. So actually, going from a pure physical to going good amount of digital blending with your physical experiences helps retailers, helps merchants, helps buyers to come up with the right kind of product for their customers, because it's much easier, much faster. It's much more lean. And like you said, so from the sustainability point of view, it's much less in energy and money both, which means the products are much more sustainable. And in fact, everybody today, all of us today care a lot about sustainability and environment around us.
Yeah, and I think that actually is a great segue for me to even talk about speed to market and just eliminating the redundancies in the line plan and how you're building out your assortment plan, working with your designers, your developers, your merchants, your marketers, and of course your go-to-market strategy. There's so many redundancies in there. There's a lot of manual work in there. If you eliminate those things, infuse technology, and digitize some of the ways that you're working, you could reduce your time to market. That way you're reacting to your customer behavior a lot faster. And like you said, you can change and adjust and be more fluid and flexible in your assortment decisions, giving the customer what they truly want at that time.
Yeah, I think reducing time to market is key, especially now, right? When customers want things now, they have an idea, they want to see it in store, and trends are constantly changing. So I think that's definitely key. And unfortunately, like you said at the beginning of the episode, retailers are very slow to change. And so that can be unfortunate because, this does require a change, but I think it's an important change that they all have to take on board over the next couple of years. To touch on sustainability a little bit, I know that it's an important subject for you, and it is for us as well. So I'm just curious, what steps do you think retailers should be taking to promote sustainability, but that being said, not compromise on profitability at the same time? Because I think people usually see sustainability as this thing where, all right, well, if we're sustainable, we're not going to be making money. I don't think that has to be the case.
No, I think the way to start the sustainability question is to understand where product is coming from. Number one, if it's ethically sourced, I think that's the number one question you need to ask. Is your supply chain transparent? Can you actually track and trace and see how goods are being made? Can you use, a tool like SourceMap, which customers use to see how vans are made, for example? Getting that visibility is so important, but then understanding the relationship you have with your suppliers. Can you reduce those minimum order quantities? I talk about this a lot because Overproduction is the thing that irks me the most because it's something that we can avoid. It is driven by capitalism because people want to make more money. And sadly, if we cannot reduce those minimum order quantities, then the retailer and the brand is going to pay a lot more for that product, which will, of course, reach the customer. So what you want to do is not only reduce overproduction and overbuying, but that will not only directly impact your sustainability metrics, but I think as a whole, the industry needs to work together to understand what sustainability metrics and validation tools should be used, because there's over 450 out there that brands can use to claim sustainability. So I think that we need to work together globally to understand what does sustainability mean and how can brands start to adhere to those sustainability metrics. But the way for brands to start is really about understanding how much they're buying and how much they're producing. Because let's be honest, those returns that are coming through from digital right now, where are they going? You know, not all of them can go to ThreadUp and Poshmark and the Real Investair. You know, a lot of that is going to landfills. And I think we're seeing that more and more as consumers because people are a lot more aware. Customers are a lot more savvy, you know. I hope that answered your question. I know that was a big question because I love to talk about sustainability.
So like you said, you know, reducing the minimum order quantity is very important. I agree with you there that, you know, if we can reduce the minimum order quantity for when we are placing the purchase order, that will help because that means I don't have to stock too much and then have a clearance sale at the end of the season or throw them in the dump. In fact, you know, let's say if we do smaller minimum order quantity and also if we can spread the deliveries through the few weeks or few months during the season, that way what we could do is like we can say, well, send me so many at the beginning of the season and the first week, and then, you know, 2 weeks or 3 weeks down, send me so much more, and then I can potentially buy some more. Do you think the merchant can do some a plan like this where they can, you know, spread out the deliveries and manufacturing commitment? Some of them are hard commitment that I'll take first to deliveries, but then after I receive my first delivery within a week or two, I'll confirm if I want to take third or fourth delivery. Do they even have this option?
Some brands, yes, they do, especially around basics and key drivers where they're more seasonless. I think you do see that. With fashion items, no. I think it's impossible to do that. But I do think that it is possible to test the market with a smaller quantity and then build on that and see, you know, let the customer validate the product even before production. That would be an incredible thing if brands could do that. And some brands are doing that. You know, with, you know, think back to like focus groups from like Mad Men. But it is possible. And that way you can validate with the customer what's working, what colors are working, if the fit block is even something that they'd be interested in, or the silhouette. Sorry, I went too far back. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity around that. And I think, you know, you bring up a great point around when the orders are already placed and the goods are bought. But what if you do that prior, when you're actually designing and developing product, staggering that development when you learn more closer to the market? So, and if it takes a lot less to develop something that's more basic than something that's more intricate, you can actually develop that closer to market because it takes a shorter amount of time to develop that product. And then you can validate closer to season. So I think that there's a lot of ways around it. You can just have to be a little more creative. And, you know, the fashion industry, retail, it can be so rigid. So I think it's just fighting those restrictions that fashion has put on a lot of brands, like, you know, fashion shows, for example, and adhering to, you know, seasonal drops. I don't think that we need to work that way anymore.
Yeah, in fact, I agree with you there. It's important that these brands they are investing so much into their loyalty programs. So all these customers that they have, the loyal customer base, they are also their focus customer. They that could be their focus group as well, and can be engaged during product development, right? Similarly, new these days in the marketing, we are using all these social media influencers, these people who are now actually taking your products to their audience, their followers. I think these influencers, your loyal customers, the first long time followers of these influencers, they could be actually participating in your product development, and in fact early adopters of your product. So that way they can get and give you the feedback, so that you can then order them bulk orders for the rest of the customer base. In fact, this also adds a certain level of exclusivity, and actually creates a certain level of demand and for the that certain product. So I think this is where definitely I see there's a lot of opportunity, like you said, which could help retailers to reduce the amount manufactured, the product wastage or inventory wastage, and at the same time improve their margins, because now they are investing less in the inventory and still able to keep the good product. In fact, for the exclusivity, they could even charge a little higher.
Yes, absolutely. 100% I agree with you. I think as long as the influencers that you're choosing to work with you are really truly brand ambassadors, because you don't want to lose your brand authenticity. And I think that's something that we really need to be careful of, because what we've seen is a brand like Walmart, which is great, and I love that they're paving the way with so many different things, especially around TikTok. I really like what they're doing. But if a customer, even if I'm a customer, if I don't believe that influencer is actually loving what they're promoting, I'll dismiss the brand, let alone that influencer. So I think that there's a thin line there, but I think that there is an opportunity, especially with using brand ambassadors even within your organization. I think I've talked about this on Retail Wire, actually. We had a big discussion around associates and using store associates to be brand ambassadors, and I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, in fact, this has worked really well for us in the B2B marketing also, like where we say that every employee in the company is actually your brand ambassador, is also part of your marketing and sales programs, because every employee actually is also face of the brand, and so they should be communicating with the customers, and especially if they are passionate about their brand, the company they work for, they will be able to communicate authenticity to the customer, and that's actually the best way to communicate or create your brand awareness.
Yeah, agree.
I did also want to ask your opinion on pre-orders in particular as a way to promote sustainability and maybe reduce some of that waste that you were talking about. That I think you mentioned really irks you, and it really irks us as well. And so just thinking about ways that retailers could actually try to determine how much is too much and how much is enough. What is your opinion on using pre-orders to gauge demand so that you can actually take orders for product that maybe hasn't even been developed yet, but you're using that as a vehicle for sustainability?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think any way where you can sell product to the customer before production, it holds so much value, not only around sustainability metrics, but also around the rate of returns. So I think that before product is developed, of course, we're going to be using data to understand what do customers want, what are they buying, and what are they returning, what are they abandoning in their carts, and how does that translate to what we're developing, and producing for that next season. So as long as data is being used to understand how product is being developed and what product is being developed, I think that the pre-order or made-to-order models, I think that they are very forward-thinking, even though it's something that's been around for decades. Just look at Savile Row. So I think that there's a lot of value there, and I would be a huge promoter of pre-order, made to measure, made to order, just for the reducing of overproduction alone.
Yeah, in fact, we've seen pre-order as a good business opportunity, particularly in electronics. Like, Apple does it every year. They take pre-orders for their phones. PlayStation, Sony does it almost every time they launch a new console. But then I think Nike also uses it pretty effectively for their certain really high end products like their Jordans and all that, right? So I think as long as you have your certain flagship products, you have a good brand following, pre-order really creates a lot of good opportunity to reduce like time to market, reducing time to market, because now before the item is shipped from your supplier to your warehouse, you already know how much you are going to start packing and shipping. So in fact, you could even get them packed by your supplier, your manufacturer itself. You don't have to bring in and cross dock and do all the unpacking and then packing.
Yep, the less people that touch that product, the better. The more sustainable it is, right? But pre-order is not new. I mean, I think about my time even, 20 something years ago working at Harrods on the floor. I started in sales. I love fashion. I've always been in it. We had trunk shows. So designers would come in or brands would come in and they would have trunk shows for exclusive clientele. And you see this across every department store. That's something that is part of the department store culture and that loyal customers expect to be invited to. Not only is it fun, it's a great way to connect with other like-minded customers and meet them. But also that's where pre-orders happen, our trunk shows. So I think it's not new, but it's something that maybe has dropped off, obviously during the pandemic, but we are going back into stores soon. And I think, adding that digital component where, even maybe the goods could be drop shipped directly to the customer, that takes out another layer. I think that's a great idea. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. Like, this stuff isn't new, but sometimes it's about going back to basics. And so even though pre-order is kind of an older idea, it seems new now because very few people have been actually doing it. And it actually goes back to what you were saying before about made to order. Made to order is also not a new idea. It's, clothes at one point were only made to order before we started mass producing everything. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the recent trend towards personalization and customization again. I know that Amazon has recently launched a made-for-you custom clothing line that relies on sizing technology to create clothing that's really based on your measurements. So I'm curious if you think that is becoming a trend, and is that going to become the future of retail? Is that what customers are going to start expecting?
Yeah, I think so. I think if we can get the customer's size right, we've solved, I feel like 50% of retailers' problems. Sizing is a huge challenge in footwear and apparel. And there's a lot of technology out there that's already being developed around sizing, and Amazon is absolutely testing the one around their t-shirts, and I'd love to see how that translates. I haven't seen any metrics after they said they were launching, but I do think that is the way of the future. A lot of brands, merchants, retailers are stuck with buying size ranges, and a lot of those size ranges, they don't sell. So, we're used to, and every buyer is gonna love that I'm saying this, that when you have extra small, small, medium, large, you're buying 1, 2, 2, 1, right? So these are things that are built into merchants and retailers, but we're buying that way because that's what's offered to us from a supplier, from a factory, because that's how they're producing, because it's less wasteful for them, and they can get more out of that fabric if they cut more smalls and mediums, for example. But that's not what people are buying. That's what they're returning, in fact. So we have to look at sizing differently. If we can get sizing right, your rate of return goes down. That level of personalization is is invaluable, because that customer will stay loyal to you. They'll keep coming back. They'll keep buying that same t-shirt because they know it fits. I mean, I have a closet full of the same sweater from Club Monaco and it is in all colors because it fits me perfectly. And that just, it just adds that extra added value. If I don't have to go through that return process and I'm a happy, loyal customer, that brand is winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think luxury brands in particular can really take advantage of that, right? Because they have some of that flexibility. And so they can create that premium experience where that clothing is made to fit you like a glove. And you don't have to pick between two sizes if you're somewhere in between. And it can actually be made for your body, and you can feel that much better about it and be that much more invested in the brand. So I think that's a great idea. Before we let you go, I did want to quickly touch as well on the topic of diversity in the retail industry too. There are a lot of organizations right now that are making a push recently for diversity, whether it's diversity of race, gender, thought, background, whatever it is. And so I'm curious if you think retail in particular can benefit from that, and why so?
Yes, 100%. The more diverse people you have on your teams, the more empowering it is. I will tell you that most brands and retailers that I've worked for, at that top C-suite level, everyone is the same gender and they look exactly the same. So to me, that tells me and my colleagues that, and even my salespeople, that, you know what, we're never going to get there because there's nobody that looks like me up there. And that's disheartening, and it's sad, and it's extremely unfair. It's an old boys club and it needs to change. In fashion specifically. Now, is it changing? Yes, it is. I think that across gender, across age, and of course across ethnicity, I do believe there is change happening. I don't know if it's happening fast enough for my liking, but the fact is diversity helps creativity, right? It gives customers a sense of you understanding who they are, what they are, because not all your customers look the same way or are the same size or are the same race, right? So if leadership teams are not walking their sales floors, seeing who their customers are, how can they really understand who they are if they've never been in their shoes? And super passionate about this, obviously, being a woman of color. But, what I've seen is, yes, things are slowly changing. There's a lot of, DEI leaders out there being pushed into the forefront. You see that a lot on LinkedIn, these huge announcements. Great, bring them on board, but are they actually going to make change? I think that it's still something to be said. But I do hope so. And I do think that it will happen because a lot more younger people that are entering the industry, they are of color, they are of various genders and races. So I think that as they question a lot more what leadership is doing, that is really the key. It is these young people and how they will impact the industry, because I feel that that generation, I work with a lot of schools, so that's something that I do push. I want them to push the narrative. I want them to think that they can be at the top, because they absolutely can and they will. So there's a lot of work happening, and I think it's good. I'd like to see more, but I think we're getting there slowly.
Yeah, in fact, I agree with you. The sustainability and diversity are the real challenges right now that we, as a business, have. The capitalism or the corporate culture, everything. Right now, that's where the real challenge is. And in fact, like these retailers are transforming from their purely siloed organization to a digital transformation, much more lean companies. Similarly, they have to transform from very, monolithic or whatever you want to call it, simple, very, very simplistic, to a much more diverse culture and diverse set of people in their company, and also be very aware of sustainability. In fact, all these things are going to take a lot of energy because change very hard to come. But if we do it right, then in the long run, we'll always be happy that we did it actually.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't want us to only look at DEI as the corporate office or the sales floor. I think we also have to look at it in the product we choose, especially as merchants of wholesale brands. If we always hear about, the Sephoras of the world filling a quota, to buy more Black-owned brands. And I think that's great. And I hope that it's not going to be a quota anymore. And it's going to be, this is part of the norm. Let's buy more, Indigenous created brands, Black-owned brands, female developed brands. And I think that we will get there. But we need to keep talking about it. We need to keep having a voice and, questioning retailers' decisions. Because if we don't, they're going to continue to do what they're doing. And consumers are becoming way more savvy. And thank God for digital age, because we have access to a lot more information and we can see what's going on. And we just need to question more.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. And thank you for tackling, as Anil said, two really big issues, I'd say, or topics in the retail industry. Before we wrap up, let's conclude with you telling our audience what's next for you and how they can best keep up with you.
Yeah, sure. I'm extremely active on LinkedIn. I also have a newsletter called The Merchant Life, which is also translating into a column with the British Display Society, which is great because we talk about how retail works in silos, so how merchants and visual teams and sales teams can work together. And then I do have a YouTube channel with some of the videos that I put together with some friends. And I'm part of Retail Wire's Brain Trust, so you can always find me on there commenting with my merchant perspective, sometimes controversial, but needed. So yeah, you can find me also at retailstrategygroup.com.
In fact, I really love your newsletter. I wait for that and I read it every time it comes up in my email.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We've had some great engagement because we do add a little bit of humor. We want to make sure that it's a conversation. It's really about a retail insider perspective on retail ins and outs, and how maybe, in some cases I give tips, but really about my experience and my point of view, and hopefully that will help other retailers to change some of the ways that they're working.
Well, we definitely recommend to our audience to check you out on a number of different channels. They can find you on you're omni-channel.
Everywhere. I'm omni-channel.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you so much for joining us on our channel today and sharing your experiences. It's been really great to have you.
My pleasure. My favorite topic.
That's it for this episode of the Customer-Centric Retailing Podcast, featuring our special guest, Liza Amlani. Liza has amazing boots-on-the-ground experience to share with her clients, and she's clearly very passionate about two important topics in the retail world: sustainability and diversity. She strongly believes that retailers can be ethical and equitable without compromising on their bottom line. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Please rate and review and recommend to a friend or fellow retail fanatic. This podcast is brought to you by Hot Wax Commerce.